Jen Lemberger, and I am a librarian here at Central Library, and I have the distinct pleasure to be the person who gets to coordinate with the League of Women Voters. So thank you for the continued partnership. We are quite pleased. One of the things that while we have you here that I'd like to mention is we are in the midst of our Santa Barbara Reads programming. So this is when the library chooses a single book that we hope the entire community will read, join in discussions, participate in events that are going on. So there are calendar of events that are on the back table that we encourage you all to take on your way out. Today's event, we are extremely pleased to have the League of Women Voters covering the immigration information in the county. And with that, I would like to introduce the co-vice president of Program and Advocacy for the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara, Lindsay Baker.
I would like to thank the Santa Barbara Public Library for co-sponsoring this forum with our League of Women Voters. Also, thank you Gary Atkins Sound Systems and Sylvia Uribe for Spanish translation. This forum is being recorded by TVSB and will be available on Channel 17. We now have a fixed schedule for that, and you can look it up on TVSB. The dates and times are Tuesday at 9 in English and Fridays at 2, and the Spanish version Wednesdays at 9 p.m. and Saturdays at 3 a.m. And the Tuesdays is 9 p.m. I didn't say p.m. Tuesdays 9 p.m. and Fridays 2 a.m. for English. We will also have it on our league website. And that would be lwvsantabarbara.org. If you are interested in learning more about the League, or if you would like to join the League, which we would like for you to do today, you can speak to Bev or Joni. Actually, Joni's at the back table. Bev's leading the meeting today, so it'd be Joni at the back table. Thank you, Bev King, Vijaya Jamalamadaka, and Joni Jones for organizing this forum. Our next forum will be the third Wednesday of January, and the topic is affordable rental housing. There's a lot of new laws and a lot of things changing in the city of Santa Barbara, and if you want to hear what's current, come to our forum. And I have two more announcements. For League members, there will be a holiday party December 20th at Louise Lowry Davis Center. At the table, there is a sign-up sheet for the event. Please come. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for joining the League of Women Voters this afternoon for an immigration update on what is happening in Santa Barbara County. The League has had a position on the issues related to immigration since 2008, and we advocate for our positions. I wish to emphasize that this forum is not a debate. The panelists are here to tell us what they are experiencing as, quote, boots on the ground organizations active in our county. We are fortunate in this county to have many organizations addressing problems and providing service. Unfortunately, we could not have them all on our panel, but I would like to introduce Tracy Magna. She's the immigration specialist from the Office of the Public Defender of Santa Barbara County, and her assistant, Dee Engler, and I guess they haven't arrived yet. Tracy and Dee will be available at the information table after the forum to answer any questions. And the Santa Barbara Response Network also has information that Frank will be telling us about. Each panelist will speak for 15 minutes, and then we will take a 10-minute break. When we resume, it will be time for your questions. You have an index card on your chair to help you organize your thoughts. So, let us begin. Our first speaker, our first panelist is Diane Martinez. She is the director of Immigrant Hope Santa Barbara, a nonprofit organization, legal center. In 2005, she and her husband Craig moved to the west side of Santa Barbara. While working with immigrant families at Santa Barbara City College and also through her church, and living among immigrant families, she said she felt God's call to love her neighbor in a more tangible way and opened Immigrant Hope Santa Barbara in 2012. Immigrant Hope helps immigrants determine if there is a pathway to residency and provides information on education opportunities. Diane has worked with the disadvantaged and the underserved populations since 1988. Diane?
As Bev introduced, Immigrant Hope Santa Barbara is a faith-based ministry, and we're located within the west side of Santa Barbara. And our mission is to love our neighbors and provide opportunities and information for their inclusion into our community. Because many people have different ideas about immigration laws, we wanted to start this off with kind of a basic immigration 101, providing you details about immigration pathways to immigration and barriers that apply to immigration. So we're going to start off with a definition of who is an immigrant. Okay, so an immigrant is a person who has a pathway to apply and to become a lawful permanent resident. So a lawful permanent resident is someone who has the intent to reside permanently in the U.S. They get authorization to work, they're authorized to travel abroad and return, and they can naturalize after so many years. And so the key to understanding legal permanent residency is that the person has to want to be in the United States, has to be in the United States more days than out of the United States in a given year. Okay. So who is a non-immigrant? So a non-immigrant are any of these different categories: tourists, student visas, temporary workers, religious workers, trafficking victims, and other crime victims. There really is an alphabet of different visas that are available. So non-immigrant status is for people who enter the U.S. on a temporary basis, whether for tourism, for business, for temporary work, or for study. Once the person has entered the U.S. in this non-immigrant status, they are restricted to the activity or reason for which they were allowed entry into the United States and for the approved amount of time for that entry. Most immigrant visas are issued only to applicants who can demonstrate their intention to return to their own country. Okay, who is undocumented? So there's a couple of different scenarios that consist of somebody being undocumented. So first, a person who entered the U.S. without papers or without inspection. Without inspections mean that they did not come through a Customs and Border Patrol agent or an inspection at the port of entry, whether by land, whether by sea, or whether by air. And with legal documents. The second situation is people that come into the United States. So many people may come into the United States, like with tourist visas or with student visas, and they overstay the visa. So when the visa expires, they do not leave. Once the visa expires, then they are in undocumented status. Many people always ask, well, why don't people just apply? Why don't they just put in an application? But there actually has to be a pathway to it, and these are the pathways to legal permanent residency. And you can see that family-based visas, employment-based visas, refugees and asylees, the diversity program, and other categories. The diversity program allows 50,000 people into the United States each year. That is on the chopping block right now, and we have we don't know how much longer that is going to be available. And the lottery program is for those countries that do not have many people immigrating. And so they get a chance to put in an application to come to the United States. As you can see, the family-based visa is the biggest category of people that come into the United States. Between the family-based visas and the employment-based visas, it's close to 90% of the immigration visas that are issued each year. And there's about 1 million visas that are issued throughout the year. So in some cases, they're not a pathway to legal permanent residency. And so in these cases, these types of visas, the non-immigrant visas, tourists, students, temporary protective status, which is also a program that is on the chopping block right now, and we don't know, some countries have already been, they've already set limits on when they would start returning to their countries, and there's, I think, 12 countries, and there's additional ones that throughout the year will most likely be, their temporary protective status will expire, and they will have to return to their own countries. Deferred action for childhood arrivals, and even though that program has stopped, we will have people in that status for the next 2 years. And then anybody that's undocumented. So the exception to this is if one of these people were to marry a U.S. citizen, then it may open up a pathway to apply. Before anyone can naturalize, they have to become a legal permanent resident first. So the pathway to naturalization always comes through legal permanent residency. So after being a legal permanent resident for 5 years for most visas, but 3 years if you've attained it through marriage, then you can apply for naturalization. Some of the barriers to naturalization include the cost of the application, which is $725, and the requirement to speak English and pass a reading and written test on the U.S. history and government. There are some exceptions that allow people to take the test in their own language, but this often means that you must be a resident for many years to meet those requirements, because until you're 50 years of age and 20 years, or 55 and 15 years as a legal permanent residency, you're not able to claim that exception. And this information here on the screen is from the California Immigration Policy Center. It's called Immigrants in Santa Barbara County. This handout is on the back table. So according to that, in 2010, there were approximately 25,000 legal permanent residents here in Santa Barbara County that were already eligible to naturalize. And by 2015, there were approximately 8,000 more potentially eligible. So that means that we have an additional 33,000 residents who would increase the county voting population by about 12%. Now, last year before the election, we did have a large number of people that were choosing to naturalize, to try and be a part of the vote. And so this number doesn't include the 2016 and 17 figures in it. Okay, so I think most people will agree that we have a broken system. We know that U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents, many of them go on a waiting list when they want to apply for other family members. Many must wait many years for the 3 countries of India, Mexico, and the Philippines. For many family members, it's close to a 20-year waiting list before their families can migrate here to, or immigrate here to the U.S. There are issues with admissibility. So for many of the people that have come over without being inspected, without coming through Customs and Borders Patrol, and they are here undocumented, even if they marry a U.S. citizen, there's still the issue of them being here admissible. And so there are waivers available, but the waiver is actually an extreme hardship waiver, and family separation isn't seen alone as a extreme hardship. So they must prove that the separation would cause an extreme hardship according to the definition of the Department of Homeland Security. I disagree with that. I think family separation is a huge hardship. So assistance for immigrants. So quite a few years ago, the Department of Justice created recognized immigration legal centers and are accredited representatives to do immigration work. And the purpose with this is so that many immigrants can't afford the high cost of a lawyer. So it was for them to obtain low-cost, knowledgeable legal assistance and to navigate a very complicated immigration system. These centers provide authorized assistance. They were required to charge low fees, and if a person cannot afford any fee, to do the work free. It was also to help people understand that they did not have to go to immigration consultants, or some people call them notarios, that are not trained and sometimes set people up for harm and deportation. Importa and Immigrant Hope Santa Barbara are the only two recognized sites in Santa Barbara County. To become recognized requires that you establish a nonprofit, that you charge minimal fees, not refuse service to anybody. And within that are accredited reps who have completed a comprehensive immigration law training course, along with additional training and experience specific to the types of applications that they will be completing. For Immigrant Hope Santa Barbara, these are the services that we provide in our immigration center. So we do consultations and screenings, which are really important in these days, trying to see if there is any open pathway for legal permanent residency. Freedom of Information Act request. Everybody within the United States has a file on them, and so many times the history may be long of an immigrant here, and they don't recall the things that have happened or the applications that they put in. So we are able to request for free their file, their immigration file, or their Customs and Border Patrol information, so that we can make the best possible advice, give them the best possible advice for an immigration benefit. We also do naturalization, family visas, green card renewals, Violence Against Women Act, and U-Crime visas. We are also an education center, and so we are doing English classes and civics classes, and the interesting thing about that is both of these classes in 2015 increased by over 150% with the amount of people, because legal permanent residents are also fearful right now. And because of that fear, and English and the civics being one of the big barriers to becoming a citizen, then we have seen just the increase in people coming to try and learn those things so that they can pass the test and become U.S. citizens. We do, one of the things that we saw with all of the fears is what is going to happen to my children. So we started doing family emergency preparedness plans with the assistance of the Fund of Santa Barbara, giving us a grant to help us do that. And then we're able to talk through with the families what their plan would be if deportation or detainment occurs. And then we do a driver's license study course, and then we do many community education classes on resources and other things that would be helpful as far as educating. Okay, Importa, we have a great partnership with Importa, who has, in the last 2 years, has done over 300 citizenship and DACA cases. They have an office both in North and South County, and they also are working with a pro bono attorney and have 6 cases in immigration court. Importa has a grant that allows them to do all of their services for free. So these are some of the changes that we have seen in this last year. Increased caseloads, of course, come with all of this because people are no longer feeling secure. And removals and deportations are rising for people that have no criminal record. And of course, these detainments and deportations have long, serious effects on children and immigrants. According to the Immigration Policy Institute, there are over 4.1 million children in the U.S. with at least one undocumented parent. 29% of those children reside in California. And so there's other consequences to the families. There is a handout in the back that talks about some of the emotional and mental stress that occurs within children due to the separation that occurs because of deportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Our next speaker is Frank Rodriguez. He was born and raised in Santa Barbara as the son of Mexican immigrants from Degollado, Jalisco, Mexico. After finishing his BA at UCLA, Frank worked as a laborer and community and elections organizer throughout Southern California. Frank recently completed his master's in Latin American Studies at the University of Texas in Austin, and he focused on how mapping has and can become an empowering tool for organizing Latino communities. Frank is a hip-hop head who is more likely to be listening to R&B or cumbia. He loves sports, but understands that life is a game and soccer is serious, especially when it comes to Chivas Rayadas de Guadalajara. And you will find him most likely skateboarding or riding to meetings around town. Thank you.
Everybody, how's everyone doing? Good. So my name is Frank Rodriguez. Oh, there we go. My name is Frank Rodriguez. I'm a policy and communications associate with CAUSE, the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy. How many people know about CAUSE here? I see, yeah. I know, I see a lot of familiar faces. So I just want to really recap a lot of the work that we have been doing and do the highlights. And I know I can't get into all the details that we've done, but I'm glad a lot of you know what we do because you see kind of the daily work that we're doing with our grassroots leaders, which is really the immigrant community here in Santa Barbara. So the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy started back in 2001. And it really started off the living wage campaigns. And really the trajectory that we saw statewide with labor unions, with other people seeing the power that the immigrant and Latino community had, especially in Southern California, there was a big focus on organizing and working with the immigrant and Latino community. So when CAUSE merged with Pueblo, that I bet a lot of you were familiar with, that did a lot of the house meeting model, that did a lot of the electoral work, joined together to really create a strong force in the Central Coast and Santa Barbara and Ventura counties to really start working on immigrant rights. And what's important that I appreciate about the work that we do at CAUSE is that the work is not, and tell me if I'm going too fast, because I usually speak fast, is the work is not just working for immigrant rights at the point of immigration law. The point is, like, how do we really show love to the immigrant community at all times, right? And so I think that's extremely important because it's how are we making sure that people's tenant rights and housing rights are being upkept, right? Because we're talking about people that are working within the margins and in these spaces in the civic engagement that they engage in our society, we many times push them away. So they don't know about their tenant rights. And we've been focusing and working on housing issues and making sure people aren't getting unjustly evicted here from Santa Barbara. And we focus a lot of our work regionally. If we go south and we look what we're doing in Oxnard and Ventura, we're working a lot with farm worker rights and really environmental racism. I think this region is really strong in having a focus on making sure we have a strong environment. But how do we make sure that environmental racism, like power plants put in predominantly communities of color, and we don't experience it here? How do we choose where these places are, these power plants are being placed? And then if we go up north, again, looking at Santa Maria, another farm working community, and as of late has been, since for a few years, has been experiencing a lot of violence, especially a lot of gang violence. So we've been working with the youth there, especially the immigrant youth, to be the front line to really talk about what changes we need to really address the violence, to address the deaths that are happening within our community. So that's really a lot of the regional work that we've been doing, but of course, a lot of it has been focusing on immigrant rights. So I really want to applaud the work that Immigrant Hope, that Importa, and other organizations that provide that service work, that really emergency situation when someone doesn't know what to do and where to go, they have these spaces here in Santa Barbara, so we're really appreciative of that. Cause, what we focus on, is doing a lot of the advocacy work. And so that's really been centered around our work with the California Immigrant Policy Center, which Diana mentioned a little bit. That's our statewide alliance that we've been working with really for the last around 5 years, really working to make sure that the statewide efforts on immigrant rights that are happening across the state are localized and really molded to fit to the model here in Santa Barbara in working with our communities. For instance, this past year, we started off by working with and starting off our Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition, which is a coalition of different organizations that really focus on advocating for immigrant rights. Some of those organizations include groups like Future Leaders of America. How many people know Future Leaders of America? Great organization that's working with Latino youth throughout both counties of in Santa Barbara and Ventura. And so when in September, when we started hearing that they were going to rescind DACA, we got together and had an action in front of the courthouse to really have a space to allow undocumented youth to be a voice and voice their opinions and show that they have support. And really, because mental health is a huge part of this process of making sure our immigrant community is allowed to not only just protest for the point of protesting and making their voice heard, but understanding it's a mental process in a way to really calm nerves when drastic situations are happening. And then with MyCop, which, how many people are familiar with MyCop? Not as involved around here, but they're in Santa Maria and in Oxnard because they work with the Mixteco indigenous community that is a big part of the farm worker community. There's been different trends of the populations that have been coming. Like we started off, the son of immigrants from Jalisco, Mexico, and my pops is over there. And that is kind of a big part of the region that came here. And as the last decade, we've been seeing a lot of the Mixteco farm workers that don't speak Spanish a lot of times and speak their native language. So we need to learn how to work with those communities. So we're glad MyCop is part of our efforts. And one of their board members, around 2 months ago, was picked up by ICE in Oxnard and was put up for deportation. So we mobilized, we took people over to the detention center in Los Angeles and over to his court case, and we're able to bring him back to our community. And the thing that he had on his record was illegal re-entry, but hadn't done no criminal activity. So we wanted someone who was a board member in a strong organization in the Central Coast. That was an action that we did earlier this year. And so a lot of the ways we organize and structure our efforts is really first starting with our base leaders. So our leaders here, and I'll focus on Santa Barbara, because in Santa Maria and in Oxnard it's a lot different. Here, our base is really a lot of domestic workers, a lot of service workers, people working in the restaurant industry, of course. And so these are the people that make up our base of leaders. And these are the people that really push and let us know how we are going to do our work. Hence why we do a lot of eviction work, because they were telling us they're getting evicted from the west side. And so that's why we had been focusing on that in the past few years. But we started off this year in May 1st in really pushing for immigrants that day. So that's International Labor Day. But like I was talking about earlier, there's been this trend, especially after 2001, where labor and everybody started really pushing to support the immigrant community. Because before that, labor did not organize in the immigrant community. They thought, that's not a community we work with. And when we talk about the trajectory of California, we haven't always been this progressive state, right? And a lot of that does come from the rise of immigrant children being the people sitting in our state legislatures, sitting in our positions of power, locally and especially in Southern California. Just look at names like Kevin De Leon. These are people he was raised from a single mother who was a domestic worker. That's the same upbringing that I had. So we have these people that have these experiences and have been pushing this kind of conversation of how do we really include the immigrant community here in California. And so that leads us to kind of conversation that has been at the forefront and really in the news of what's going on, and that has been the California Values Act, which is Senate Bill 54, which on 15 days after May Day, we went over to Sacramento to lobby with hundreds of other people across the state for a lot of bills, including pushing the budget to have some funding to really support the services that immigrant communities need, such as learning English, such as getting jobs. But at the same time, we advocated for the California Values Act, which was to limit the way immigration customs enforcement can work within our county jails here in California. And this has been a trajectory that's been a long time coming. I think this is going back to Kevin De Leon and being the son of a domestic worker immigrant. That's understanding that we don't want to separate families. We want to really focus on how we can unite families and keep them together and make they're part of the fabric of our society. So how do we kind of change the direction and not focus on the separation that happens far too much here in our community? And so when we went over to push for this, we saw that it got signed by the governor. We were doing phone banking. We were really involving a lot of the community. And I do want to thank the Interfaith Sanctuary Alliance and the Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice here in Santa Barbara that put on a forum to really start conversating of how that's going to look. And when I'm talking about the trajectory, before that we had 2 state bills. The last one was the Truth Act that was signed a year ago. And basically what that says, it's trying to clarify what is the entanglement or what is the relationship between Immigration Customs Enforcement, which is the federal agency and the hand that does that focuses on deportations. And then we also have local law enforcement in our county jails and how they're interacting in there. And I mean, and that's a complicated conversation. It's a difficult conversation. But it's one we want to engage in because there's a rhetoric of good immigrant and bad immigrant, and we want to have that conversation head on because that is the way we're going to be kind of really pushing of how do we really show love for the immigrant community, kind of like I started this conversation. Because showing love cannot just start with pushing for stronger immigration law. It has to be in the broader sense of how do we make sure someone's included within our community, right? And so that's why SB 54 has been signed, and also the Truth Act goes into effect, a component of it in January 1st, 2018, which is calling for that transparency to really be discussed. And so we're looking forward for that conversation with our local law enforcement. I mean, we had a great town hall. I know there was a lot of debate on where we were going, but I think there was understanding that we do want to work together and really get somewhere together because I think this is dealing with people's lives, and I think we need to take this very seriously. And the last thing that we've been doing with the Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition has been having an alerta system, which is a text system. So we're the type of people that we go knock on doors and we go have these face-to-face conversations, really pushed by the housing model, where you go meet at people's houses and from that try to meet with more people. And that's how we were doing a lot of the immigrant rights trainings that we were doing. The beginning of this year was at people's houses. And so I think that was a way that we kind of outreached and really talked to the Spanish-speaking monolingual community here in Santa Barbara. But Alerta has expanded our way to do that across both counties. So it's a way that we can text what's going on. For instance, there's been a lot of ICE activity over in South Oxnard. And so people have they've sent videos of them knocking on doors. So that's why we like to clarify the rumors. We don't say, oh, this is exactly where they're at, but we just like to clarify the rumors. Because at the beginning of this year, there was a rumor that 12 people got picked up at Winchell's, and all of our leaders were calling us scared to death, right? And so this is really to make sure that everyone's on the same page, but at the same time, letting it be known truthfully what's going on, because we don't want false rhetoric to be going around, but we do want the truth to be percolating around society. And so I'll end off by talking about one other effort that they asked me to present on, if my phone would turn on. Cool. And it's the Santa Barbara Response Network. This has been a network that has been working with different agencies, such as the district attorney, local law enforcement, local civil criminal rights, and immigration attorneys, council members in Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, and with the Mexican consulate. And they've been doing this contract with, there's Jackie in the back, so if anybody has. Oh. Cool. Yeah. And so basically what they've been really working and have been having hundreds of parents come to a space where they really feel safe, which has been at schools. And that has really been a space for people to get engaged. And I mean hundreds of parents. So I think it's a great collaborative that really builds off and pushes to get the conversation going with parents. So definitely go talk to them to get more information on that. And then at the end, thank you everybody for giving us a space and being able to work with Immigrant Hope, with the Fund for Santa Barbara, with the sheriffs and everybody. We really want to continue this conversation. And I know there's maybe a lot of questions about SB 54. And I think that's something that we're going to really start to be detailing out and how it really looks here locally. And I have information of that if anybody has questions. But I'll end it right there. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Frank. And for information on the Santa Barbara Response Network, go to the back table after the forum is over and someone can talk to you there. Our next speaker, Bernard Malakian, currently serves as the undersheriff for the County of Santa Barbara. He has over 40 years of local law enforcement experience, serving as the police chief for the city of Pasadena from 1996 to 2009. And as well, he was their interim city manager for 10 months and their acting fire chief for 6 months in 1998. He has a BA in history, a master's degree in public administration, both from Cal State Northridge. And he has a doctorate in policy, planning, and development from USC. His doctoral project was on values-based discipline in law enforcement organizations. In 2009, he was elected to serve 2 terms as president of the California Police Chiefs Association, and was also in that year selected as director of the Office of Community Policing by U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, and he served in that capacity until 2013. He was recently elected chairman of the board for the National Police Foundation, a Washington, D.C. research organization. He and his wife, Nancy, live in Santa Barbara. Barney?
Thank you, Beverly, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for the opportunity and for the panelists. that are here to discuss an issue of critical importance, not just to our community, but to our nation. I have, as was mentioned, I've been in this business for a long time, and maybe as interestingly, I have been in a number of different agencies, and while I worked for the federal government, I visited police departments, sheriff's offices, and Indian reservations in 32 states. And so I have looked at a wide variety of law enforcement models. And I'm very clear, and you're going to hear a theme over the next few minutes as I'm talking about the recognition that of the importance of this issue, that this is not a theoretical issue, but an issue that involves people's lives and people's well-being, and has been mentioned, their families. And as often the case with issues of social justice and social equity, law enforcement finds itself caught squarely in the middle between competing societal interests. And I think I'm here today representing Sheriff Brown, who is currently in Sacramento, having a discussion about mental health and criminal justice. So the social equity issues continue. Immigration in our society has a long and convoluted history. With regards to the southern border of the United States, the border has been opened, the border has been closed, the border has been partially opened. It has changed depending on however the wind is blowing along in the border states as well as in Washington, D.C. But one thing that has been clear throughout my entire career is that local law enforcement has not been involved in the enforcement of immigration laws. Starting back in the mid-1970s with Chief Ed Davis in Santa Ana, who was the first police chief publicly that I'm aware of to speak out very strongly that the enforcement of immigration laws by local law enforcement would destroy the principles of community policing and undermine faith and trust in local communities, in the police departments and sheriff's offices that serve them. The primary reason for that, particularly as community policing advanced, was the recognition that that community policing was supposed to reflect a partnership between local law enforcement and the communities they serve, with an idea towards building stronger and more resilient communities. And to engage in activities that undermine that is counterproductive. Sheriff Brown is currently the president of the California State Sheriff's Association, but his position on this issue has been very clear, both during his time as the police chief in Lompoc, in his over 10 years of sheriff, and now as president of the State Sheriff's Association, and that is that sheriff's office officials do not, and will not engage in the enforcement of immigration laws, nor will they assist in the enforcement of those laws. They have not done so in decades, and I recognize, and the sheriff recognizes, the current climate has created uncertainty and fear. And so I will repeat that probably several times during the course of my remarks, that we do not engage in the enforcement of immigration laws in the field. Law enforcement is, and particularly the sheriff's office, view ourselves as guardians of this community. And in that role, we are expected to protect and serve everyone who lives and works and visits this county, regardless of their immigration status. If, in fact, in point of fact, we usually don't know what a person's immigration status is because we do not ask. If someone were to tell us what their immigration status was, that would be up to them, but we would take no action based on that. I think the controversy comes from, and the purpose for today's discussion comes from, that we make a very clear distinction between what happens in the field, what happens in the community, and what happens to those persons who are incarcerated in our jail. It is a matter of public record that Senate Bill 54, the California Values Act, was opposed by the State Sheriff's Association. And I wanted to take a few minutes to articulate what those reasons were. The first one is that the language in the bill restricts the ability of local law enforcement to communicate with federal law enforcement officials about the release of undocumented criminals. This restriction actually, in our opinion, endangers public safety and most pointedly the immigrant community. Paradoxically, and I'll come back to this in a second, it may well be that one of the unintended consequences of SB 54 will be to make the immigrant community less secure rather than more secure. There are a number of crimes that are specifically excluded. SB 54 does allow for communication with ICE in the case of certain articulated crimes. But there are a number of crimes that were excluded from that bill, which is one of the reasons that the Sheriff's Association opposed it. Those included repeated drunk drivers, chronic drug abusers, chronic domestic violence offenders, persons who assault police officers, serial animal abusers, and known gang members. And there's a much longer list than that. If a person is arrested and booked into the county jail, then there was probable cause to believe that the person committed a crime. And the sheriff's position is that people who commit serious crimes should not be released back into the community. The custodial environment provides a safe place for the transfer of these offenders. One of the things that has already started to happen because of the restrictions of the California Values Act in terms of not allowing this transfer, the direct cooperation of ICE in the custodial facility, is ICE has increased the number of its field operations in communities and workplaces, which is something they had virtually discontinued for a number of years. And so when I talk about the fact that I have some concern over whether or not the immigrant community has become less secure rather than more secure, it's really based specifically on that. There was mention earlier about the Truth Act and a number of cases, and probably before SB 54 came into being, that I wanted to articulate a position that the sheriff had taken. Had to do with the issue of the area of ICE detainers. Normally what would happen if somebody was in local custody, and this applied across the United States, not just here in Santa Barbara, someone was in local custody, the ICE would issue what was called a detainer, that is a request to hold a certain person until ICE could come and pick them up. The standard practice in a lot of places was that the person would be held until ICE came and get them, even if the underlying charge that had put them in jail, if their time had passed, they had been sentenced to jail, but their time was up on that, they would be held anyway. And the courts have ruled that that was impermissible. Sheriff Brown actually opposed that practice for a number of years before the court case ever came down, on the grounds that he argued that if ICE wanted to have these detainers have the force of law, that a judge should be signing them. In point of fact, they are an administrative document. That was probably the beginning of this issue of contention between the immigrant community and what role local law enforcement and generally local sheriffs and the management of the jail should play. The question was raised in preparation for this: what is the position of the sheriff's office now that SB 54 has passed? And the answer is very short, actually. We will abide by the provisions of SB 54. It is the law of California, and until it's changed, we will comply with it. We continue to make a distinction, though, between those people living in the community. SB 54 will not change anything about our relationship with that community, particularly in the field. But we will cooperate with ICE with respect to the jail to the degree that the law permits, and it does have some narrow provisions for doing that. I want to close with kind of where I opened, and reiterate this point that I really do, and the members of the sheriff's office, and certainly our sheriff, recognize the incredible complexity and challenge of this law. When my kids were little, I used to tell them, when they would ask me questions about that, I would say it's very difficult to imagine that you can draw an artificial line in the dirt and say that if you live on this side of the line, you can have things, But if you live on the other side of the line, you will have far fewer opportunities, and expect that not to be challenged. People will go where the betterment of their family and the betterment of their lives actually occurs. It's a reality that occurs all over the world, and the men and women of the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office recognize that. At the same time, we are challenged to enforce the law for everyone. We are challenged to do so fairly and constitutionally, and we will continue to work in that regards. But we want to emphasize that we are the Sheriff's Office, we are the law enforcement agency sworn to preserve and protect every member of this community, regardless of their immigration status, and we will continue to do so. We recognize that this current climate of uncertainty and fear may have caused some people to pull back from being willing to contact us, and all I can offer is the assurances and indeed the pledge of the sheriff and myself and the men and women of the Sheriff's Office that fear is unwarranted. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Barney. Our next speaker is Marcus Vargas. He is the Executive Director of the Fund for Santa Barbara. Prior to this, he served for 14 years as the founding director of CAUSE, a social justice organization serving the California Central Coast. Marcus's nonprofit experience also includes serving as the executive director of El Concilio, a Latin community advocacy and multi-service organization, and as the director for planning for the United Way of Ventura County. He has also served on various boards, including the McCune Foundation and the Common Cause Foundation. Awards have included the Outstanding Citizen Award from the California Federation of Teachers, Cesar Chavez Leadership Foundation Award from the United Farm Workers, and the Leadership Award from the National Women's Political Committee of Ventura County. Marcus has a doctorate and a master's degree in urban planning from UCLA. His dissertation addressed the expanding public policy and community development role in community-based organizations of color in California. Marcus?
Well, good afternoon. So taking a cue from my good friend, the community organizer and hip hop MC, Frank. How are we all doing? Good, good, glad to hear it. First, I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for what you do, for providing a forum for the discussion and dialogue around important social, economic, environmental justice issues in our community. So thank you all, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It really is an honor and pleasure to be with these folks, people who are very committed to their work and who just give so much to our community. Again, I'm with the Fund for Santa Barbara. We're your progressive community-based organization, foundation rather, here in Santa Barbara. So for 37 years, we've been the funder of community organizing, community advocacy around women's reproductive rights, to immigrant rights, to environmental justice issues, and a broad array of social, economic, environmental justice issues in our community. In fact, we have some material back on the table, and one of the reports actually shows our long history of funding organizations that are involved with immigrant rights, immigrant defense, and immigrant integration. So take a look at that. We also are a capacity building organization. We realize that organizations need help. They may do great work, but they oftentimes need training and technical assistance. So we have a very robust capacity building program for community-based organizations. And lastly, you know, over 37 years, we've developed a tremendous credibility in the community. So we are also the trusted table, and oftentimes we'll convene community efforts, community building efforts, such as Isla Vista governance effort, and most recently efforts to expand immigration legal assistance in our communities here in Santa Barbara County. So really proud to be part of that organization. You know, I want to start my few words here by saying that you cannot overstate enough the fear and anxiety that we have in our immigrant communities here in Santa Barbara County, but throughout the country. And they're well-founded fears based on changes in immigration policy coming out of the Trump administration. It's a challenging time to be working in this whole area of immigrant rights. There's very much oftentimes a mix of emotions you have, from anger and concern and anxiety to a real appreciation for the fact that as human beings, we also learn to care for one another. I've been really fortunate when the election, right after the election, the fund went into a kind of a listening mode. We listened to folks. We went to donors. We went to our grantees. We went to allied organizations and discussed what their concerns were. And ultimately, at the top of the list was concern for our immigrant community. That community that takes care of our children, that puts food on our tables, that cleans our homes, that's integrated fully into our economy, into the fabric of our communities. So I was really heartened to know that. And so consequently, the fund started putting a little more energy into really understanding what was going on in this whole area of immigrant rights, immigrant defense, and immigrant integration. And what we saw was people stepping up again. You know, community-based organizations like CAUSE and Immigrant Hope, Importa, Future Leaders of America, just to name a few, who've stepped up their work in our communities to protect the most vulnerable members, our immigrant community. And I also saw legislators at the state level. Frank did a good job of talking about, you know, what's going on at the state level and how we have legislators who clearly are looking out for the defense of all of California, not only from climate change to our immigrants community. So that's been very heartening. And also other foundations, and I'll talk about that in a moment, not just the Fund for Santa Barbara, but other foundations. Well, for example, one of the first things we did, recognizing that there is a need in the community, was bringing out Los Angeles, or rather the California Community Foundation in Los Angeles has started a justice fund, and Los Angeles Justice Fund to fund the defense of legal undocumented immigrants in Los Angeles County. We brought them down, we had discussion, and as a result of that, the fund, along with the Santa Barbara Foundation and the Weingart Foundation, are launching a Central Coast Immigrant Rights Fund, or Immigrant Justice Fund, specifically to fund organizations and efforts to legally defend undocumented members in our community. So we've done that. We've also seen, in talking to folks like Immigrant Hope and Importa and others in the work that they do, and they do incredible work, we've also found that there was a clear deficiency in our infrastructure to be able to meet the needs and demands currently of undocumented folks in terms of the legal process. You have groups like Importa and Immigrant Hope providing that important legal assistance, but we do not have enough certified individuals or attorneys who can defend clients if they get pulled into deportation proceedings. That is clear. We don't have enough attorneys and organizations to do that now, and I can only guarantee you it's going to get worse. The Trump administration has been really clear about their immigration policy. We will soon be seeing workforce raids and potentially raids in our communities. So it's important that we become prepared for this. And so I'm telling you that we are, and I've talked to folks at the state level as well, we are sorely deficient in being able to defend undocumented folks once they get pulled into deportation proceedings. So that's been clear. So the fund has been working with a number of these organizations that are actually on the ground doing the work, and we put together a Santa Barbara Immigrant Legal Defense Collaborative. And from that effort, we've been trying to coordinate more. How can we move more resources to groups like Immigrant Hope and so forth to do the job? And what has resulted from that is the development of a separate new nonprofit organization in our community. It's being developed, and it's, for lack of a better name now, it's a Santa Barbara Legal Defense Center. And the idea here is to engage attorneys, retired attorneys, law students, other attorneys willing to put pro bono time into defending immigrants in deportation proceedings. And this is really important. I think one of the things we heard early on after the election, you had groups like the Progressive Coalitions that were convening folks, and attorneys were stepping up and saying, you know what, I want to help out, and I want to help defend our members of our immigrant community. So responding to that, This group that's being developed now is about recruitment, training, and deployment of pro bono attorneys to represent clients in deportation proceedings. Can't be done unless we have the Immigrant Hopes and the Importa groups to also provide that important legal assistance, immigration legal assistance, to find out if there's any recourse at all. It's a difficult one because all these proceedings are done in Los Angeles, Adelanto. It's going to be a challenge to be able to get attorneys to drive all the way down to represent clients. But there are folks who are willing to do this, and some attorneys are doing this already pro bono. So again, very heartened to know our community cares about our undocumented immigrant folks. Another element that was recognized was a need for more public education. And I really commend the Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition and other groups that are trying to put out good information to parents. The Resource Response Network as well, to get good information to parents is very key. But I think we're going to have to be more intentional about using the public radio and television and other means of getting the word out to the undocumented community, how to avoid being pulled into any kind of deportation proceedings. So that's seen as an important need, is that public education. I want to commend, is the Public Defender's Office here yet? Tracy and them. You know, we are very fortunate not only to have organizations like these in our community, but also a public defender who understands the need to defend undocumented immigrants who are potentially get pulled into the system. And so they've trained all their attorneys in immigration law as well, and that's their goal. So we're really fortunate to have a really proactive public defender's office here in Santa Barbara, and they are definitely part of the coalition. So really what we've been finding is just the importance of collaboration, the importance of coming together as individuals, as activists, as community-based organizations, in philanthropy, as funders and donors. We can do a lot to address this issue, but it's got to be a coordinated effort. And so looking to, again, the Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition, who is coordinating a lot of the advocacy work, from support for SB 54 to local safe zones, groups like Future Leaders America, who have a number of DACA young people represented in that group, who have taken the lead in ensuring that those folks get all the information they need, and most recently we're very involved with getting them renewal for their DACA. So again, but it's also going to take looking outside beyond just the usual suspects and getting labor unions also more involved. We mentioned the faith community, and we've already have heard from Santa Barbara CLU and the Unitarian Society and folks who are really looking at sanctuary. These sound like very dramatic steps, but they may be exactly what we're going to need to make sure that undocumented people are protected. Also, there's a need to just transform and shift public opinion to a large degree. As I mentioned, here in Santa Barbara County, I'm real heartened to know that there's a strong support for our immigrant community. But overall, there's a need for public education, understanding the role of immigrants, that way they play in our economy, and how we can do everything we can to support them in their defense during these challenging political times. There's a group, the Santa Barbara Media Alliance, who's actually talking about getting more investigative reporting out to the public. And on their radar is the whole area of immigrants and how county and city government and school districts are engaged with the immigrant community. And really looking at compliance of SB 54 here in Santa Barbara County. So it's going to take all these organizations. It's going to take organizations who are concerned with civic engagement and voting. There's a number of groups who are now stepping up and saying, not only will we provide citizenship classes, but as we heard before, provide English classes to prepare permanent residents to become full citizens. And then it's full engagement. So we have some immediate issues to address. We have a very vulnerable community who needs defense. But we also have to look long term, how do we integrate effectively our immigrant community into the fabric of the society here, and that's through voting and being civically engaged in every way. So it's important that these organizations step up and that we all do what we can. I think the League of Women Voters providing this forum is really key. Again, I should mention, there's another organization, Legal Aid, Santa Barbara Legal Aid. You know, incredible organization, been around so long, they took it on themselves to be the convener of all the service providers in Santa Barbara County, both South County and North County. The fund co-sponsored some gatherings up in North County. And these are groups like the health clinics, the groups that are providing services around domestic violence, the school district, in helping them get them information, but also from them find out how our immigrant community are faring in our community. Basically, what we heard from them is tremendous fear. Immigrants are not coming in for their health appointments and so forth. And so it's really important that those groups become engaged. We only have 2 organizations in Santa Barbara County that are certified to do the work that Importa and Immigrant Hope do. There's other organizations who are interested. So another thing we are looking at is training for nonprofit organizations, family resource centers and groups like that who are interested in becoming certified so that they could also represent clients in immigration issues, legal issues. So it's a patchwork. And again, it's going to take this whole community. But again, I think we could feel very heartened to know that this community does care for our immigrant population. But it's going to take some real concerted effort to ensure that when things get worse, and I can guarantee you they will get worse, that we be there shoulder to shoulder with the same people who clean our homes, that farm workers that put food on our table, as well as doctors and lawyers and other folks who are immigrants themselves, that we stand together and defend our immigrant community. Thank you very much.
And now we have a full half an hour or a few more minutes for questions. And the way the procedure is going to be, you may ask a question by raising your hand, and the 2 persons with the mic will come, Carol and Bill will come with a mic, and you can ask your question. Now, these are questions. We're not taking personal statements and biographies of how you this, that, and the other thing. We're taking questions, and if you don't ask a question, your mic will be turned off. Okay, let's begin. And we'll go from one side of the room to the other. We'll take them in alternating.
Okay, thank you very much for your care and your explanation of things. My son-in-law is an illegal immigrant, and I was comforted by what the representative from the sheriff's office said, and I would like to know what it is like in the city of Santa Barbara. Is he, if he does nothing illegal, relatively safe here? And that might be a personal question, but...
No, I actually think it's probably valid for a lot of people. And I can tell you that no sheriff's office and no police department that I am aware of in this state engages in any immigration enforcement activities in the field.
Could I add something to that? I think it's also important that there be a strong public education to the immigrant community to really be careful and when they're out in the community, and maybe even making in lifestyle changes as well, potentially, because there are things you can do to avoid being pulled into being arrested or stopped. So it goes both ways. It's one where we should be very heartened to know our law enforcement doesn't engage in immigration policy, but I think in our immigrant community we also have to be well informed on how to avoid being arrested or being pulled into any kind of deportation proceeding as well.
Carol, up at the front.
Right here. We're dealing with it. They're watching the hands go up.
Oh, all right.
Go ahead. Yes, this is for the undersheriff. You gave us some fairly clear examples earlier of moderately serious offenses that are nevertheless excluded and protected under SB 54, offenses where, although they do have some gravity, they don't result in notification to ICE. Could you give us some examples of the other category of offenses that are sufficiently serious that at the end of somebody's stay in the county jail there would be notification?
The law actually spells out which crimes can be reported to ICE, which ones fall in the umbrella, and they are the serious ones: rape, murder, residential burglary, things that what are sometimes referred to as type 1 felonies. But on balance, it's a relatively short list.
My question is of sovereignty. And it's directed at illegal immigrants. If illegal immigrants who are not citizens have more rights than citizens, what is the underlying purpose for that? And I can give you several examples. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but DMV comes to mind. I had to prove why my last name was different than on my birth certificate. They wanted a marriage license from over 40 years ago, but told me if I were an illegal immigrant, that would not be required. I'd appreciate hearing why they have more rights.
Let me at least address the DMV issue, because we do a driver's license study course that was based upon the AB 60 law that allows undocumented immigrants to get their driver's license. And I have to tell you that the process that they must go through, the documentation that they must prove, is a lot more than what a citizen has to go through to get their driver's license.
Next question, please.
And I like to address the, especially in the work we do, we don't consider any human being illegal. We consider, that's why we like to address people as undocumented. And especially, I grew up here, and when I see people out walking in the community, I see my mom, I see my cousin that I can confuse that are across the U.S. So I see family. So when I see people calling people I grew up with in the East Side and my friends and people on the West Side, and people are calling me illegal, it really irks and it hurts, because it's just we want to be face to face and be treated equally when we're having just this mature conversation here. So that's one thing I wanted to address. And then also with the question on when is ICE notified, it's when someone is convicted of a felony punishable by imprisonment in state prison at any time. That allows for the notification to ICE. So these are detailed from the Trust Act, which is something that came before the Truth Act. So I think it's very detailed that you can go online and definitely look at. And I think that's the conversation we want to have of just because someone wasn't born here in the United States, that doesn't mean they're getting a free ride and they're not doing prison time. I mean, they're serving their time. And so we just want to make sure people are treated equally. And so those are detailed online, but that's what, I just wanted to address that question from earlier.
This is not a question, but please don't turn off the mic, because it's telling you an official position of the League of Women Voters. And that is that LWV of California supported SB 54, which several of you have talked about, and has actually supported a few other bills that would assist immigrants.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. I have a question of Diane and then Bernie. Diane, out of curiosity, of the 33,000 individuals that you said that could qualify for following through citizenship, do you know the percentage of that 33,000 that followed through to obtain their U.S. citizenship?
No, I don't. It's, like I said, that's data from 2012. And so I have no idea how many became citizens through that.
I apologize for not getting here on time at noon. You might have approached this question. Obstacles in preventing individuals applying for those green cards so that they're not undocumented. Are the obstacles too great? Money or time taken to do the application so that they come here as legal immigrants versus undocumented immigrants?
Thank you.
So So you're talking about obstacles to becoming
Right, is it,
legal
you know, is a
permanent
green
residence
card
versus citizenship.
$5,000, which is like unfathomable amount of money for documentation to be here?
No,
Well,
the main obstacle is that there has to be a pathway to legal permanent residency, and that many do not, unless you have a family member or an employer who is going to sponsor you, or you qualify for something like an asylum or refugee application, then you have no pathway to come here.
Okay, so it could be not money, but time. And then my last question, Bernie. I was just curious, the stipulation that you have to be here, even though you might have papers or don't have papers, that you have to live here 5 years to establish legal residency. Has this stipulation been enforced for like many years, or has this been an update to our immigration laws? Like, I have a family member that immigrated in 1800.
Excuse me, you've asked your question,
I
and
just
he'll
want to
give an
know why,
answer.
if 5 years has always been the case.
I would refer that to Diane. That's a status requirement, and it's not something that local law enforcement
long
deals
time.
with.
So
I'm
it's
sorry.
not 5 years to establish legal permanent residency.
Oh,
It's
okay.
once you're a legal permanent resident, it's 5 years to apply for citizenship, or 3 years if you are married.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry, thank you.
Now,
That
she
is-
has addressed these things prior
All
to
right,
the, so if you would speak to her afterwards,
Will
we
do,
would
okay.
appreciate it. Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, I was just wondering why deportation is the punishment for some of these crimes. For example, our own United States Air Force can't even communicate to our FBI database about their own criminals. How do we expect that deporting somebody, dropping them off in a bus at some halfway station in, I don't know, some town in another country, and then we're going to make sure somehow that we've gotten all the I's dotted and T's crossed, that they're going to stay there because they're good citizens of that country and they're not going to come back? And it's very upsetting that we just think of deportation. And also for SB 54, because those crimes that you mentioned, repeated domestic violence, repeated DUIs, those aren't on 54. Is that because they're not punishable in prison for prison sentences? And maybe that's the crux, that those crimes are actually more serious and they should be put in a higher category.
I suspect that, I know that one of the biggest sticking points as SB 54 was going through the process was which offenses were going to be included. And I suspect if we had another hour, you could have a very interesting panel talking about what should and shouldn't be on there. With regards to deportation, and again, I'll look to the other panelists, but up until a certain point, it's important to remember that being in this country undocumented is not considered a crime. It's considered an administrative sanction, and it's only after you have repeated illegal entries into the country that it moves into a different category. And I would throw that to one of the other panelists who could probably clarify that better than I do, but I am familiar with that.
I would only say that you're right, deportation is not a solution to the problem. A president who wasn't exactly a flaming liberal, Ronald Reagan, supported comprehensive immigration reform. And that we call that amnesty. We don't like to use that term amnesty, but he supported that. We've had efforts to get comprehensive immigration reform to address this issue, but it's been stalled in Congress, folks who just don't want to see a simple solution to the problem. So you have deportation, which it doesn't work, and in many cases is making the problem, exasperating the problem.
Because if I was the victim of a crime, I want to make sure the perpetrator served time that they're entitled to.
And for clarity, if people are convicted and sentenced, they do serve their time. The deportation occurs when they are discharged from the state prison or the county jail.
And I want to point out kind of the bigger picture of the policies that have been coming about. So we started with the Trust Act, which is the guidelines that detail what is allowed for ICE to access the local county jails to deport somebody. Those were detailed, and that was back in 2013, and that was looking at what the undersheriff was talking about of holding somebody past the time that they were there to serve. So that was clarified in the Trust Act. And then in the Truth Act, that was calling for people to really be informed when they were in county jail, their rights. And because ICE would come and interview them and then try to get them to say that they weren't there properly, and then they would get deported. So that was kind of a barrier that the Trust Act tried to do, just to inform people of their rights. And then the SB 54, the California Values Act, I think goes into what you're talking about. It's the changing values of California is those shouldn't be reasons for deportation. If someone is serving their time, if someone has gone through that system, we want to focus more on making sure we have a criminal justice system that is there to restore humans, to come back into our civil society as productive members of society, right? And so I think that's what we're really trying to get to. And so there's certain deportations that were happening that were just not just for the crimes that were being done. And we don't want people to be deported for such said reasons. So, I mean, I think it's the California Values Act and really looking at what those values has been this trajectory of really how do we be inclusive of this community and not have a different track for them than we do for other people, right? So, thank you for that question.
This question is very similar to the ones that we've been discussing, but this is for Mr. Bernard Malakian, Undersheriff. You tossed around the word criminal, and I'm wondering what is the definition of an immigrant criminal in the county jail? Is he a criminal at the point of arrest or after conviction? And what if they are found innocent or put on probation? Will they still be reported to ICE?
Under the provisions of, there's a two-part question there, and I want to make sure I get both parts. For the purposes of communicating with ICE, before SB 54, the assumption was, as I said in my remarks, that if you were arrested and booked into the county jail, that there was probable cause to believe that you had committed a crime. And if you were in the country illegally, then the sheriff's office would allow ICE to talk with you. As other panelists have talked about, the ability to do that has been whittled down significantly. With regards to whether or not, if you are convicted, now that SB 54 is passed, it really is only determined by the crimes that are on the list. So, for example, if you were convicted and sentenced to state prison and you were in the country illegally, you would be, upon the completion of your sentence or as you prepared for discharge, it would be permissible, for local law enforcement in the case of the county jail or the Bureau of Community Corrections in the case of state prisons to communicate that fact to ICE. It would not be permissible to hold you 1 day longer than 1 minute longer than your sentence. Especially if you were in county jail, the state prison probably wouldn't apply, but if you were in county jail and you weren't convicted at court or the decision was made not to charge you, then it would depend on what the nature of the original offense was. I don't know whether I've answered all your questions, but I tried.
Isn't our legal system one that if you go to court and you're determined to be innocent, then you haven't committed a crime?
The question, and we're probably going to get into kind of this esoteric realm here. I mean, this is what I mean about the lack of clarity about what is the overriding, what is the country's overriding philosophy towards immigration. People who are in this country illegally, the question then, it is not the same, and just before my partner says something, being in the country illegally does not make you an illegal person. It just means that you are in the country undocumented. It means you are in the country outside of the legal means of entering the nation. So the question that we have to answer, that we haven't answered, and as I've said before, local law enforcement gets caught right smack in the middle of this, and that's what is that person's rights? What is the extent and scope of that person's right? And that's, in truth, what we're debating, what we're discussing, what all of this is ultimately about.
Yeah, and to really say it's like a lot of the actions that have been happening within our state legislature, and like I said, it's a lot of people who are the children of immigrants and who have experienced just the irk of hearing illegal. And I totally hear the clarification. It's about being undocumented. But I think there's a rhetoric that at the nationwide has been had because of the new administration. And so I think we're really trying to clarify that rhetoric. And here it was about not having people to be deported. And we know that local law enforcement is stuck in the middle, but I think this legislation is coming from the people. The people are asking for that to be clarified completely because we want to know why people are being deported. And I think that's really the clarification and why we have laws and why we have this is we push this through our state legislature and the people spoke. So, I mean, that's why we feel that the California values are a little different from nationwide. We have a lot of immigrants here in Santa Barbara, in California, especially in Southern California. So I think that's what this law is about, and it's about that clarification happening because I think there's a lot of fear, and people want to be able to report crimes, be able to do all that, but there's just this tendency and there's this fear that's been really heightened because of this administration. But I feel being stuck in the middle, it's more of this is a clarification from the people of California asking that we want to make sure that we understand what is the relationship between Immigration Customs Enforcement and local law enforcement. And SB 54 is going a little further than the Truth Act and saying this is what we want it to look like. So we're glad that the sheriff is saying that it's going to be in compliance, and we want to make sure that we really clarify this and have this in a mature conversation, right? Because of course the rhetorics can be very divisive, but I think at the end of the day we do want to be supporting people's lives, right? So.
Hi, thanks. Good afternoon. My question is that primarily in California, probably the vast majority of illegal immigrants are Latinos. So my question is that of the other ethnic groups that are not Latinos, do you feel like ICE and the Trump administration aggressively goes after them the way they do the Latino community? And whether you do or don't, do you think it's like partially racial profiling?
Well, certainly, yeah. So undocumented immigrants are made up of a number of different ethnicities and races, and they include Asian Pacific Islanders and folks from Africa and the Caribbean and so forth. I think we reflect not the most diverse population here in the Central Coast, so it's primarily Latino. But certainly you don't see the same type of enforcement with those coming Europeans, undocumented Europeans, I'm sure. But even in our own community, we have the Hmong community and other Asian Pacific Islanders here, even in our region, that we should also be concerned about their well-being. But yeah, I'm sure there is certainly racial profiling, and that's yeah. I think any one of us, well, Frank and I could both tell you of times we've probably been folks have been taken us for being undocumented individuals. So it's there, but there's other ethnicities as well that are being profiled.
Probably say the Trump administration is not aggressive towards other immigrants. Probably?
I feel that one is the Muslim community. That one has been targeted immensely, right, as we know, with the big fight. And I didn't bring it up earlier, but TPS, the saving of TPS, and really the protection of the Haitian community. A lot of communities that, and Haitian's part of Latin America, but a lot of people conflicted sometimes. But African communities, I mean, I feel this is an issue of broader conversation of all immigrants. And this just makes me think about one thing that has been happening is the peak of deportations was in 2012. And that number of deportations has been declining since then and has had a spike as of late from the new administration. But that kind of the lowering of the number of deportations happening each year was because of these laws that were coming out in the state and limiting the way that local law enforcement, being a vehicle that was supporting, not a vehicle, I shouldn't say it that way, was a space where these deportations were taking place. So I think that's why there was a big push in limiting the deportations that came from that realm. And one of the things that Bernard brought up about now the focus of ICE going out and doing these raids in the communities or in the workplace, I think that is a different dynamic and really looking at how the administration is targeting certain communities. But I don't think that should be that should be a talking point to talk against the fight for really not having local law enforcement be an area where people are being deported. So I think that's part of that conversation is looking at the bigger picture. It was during the Obama administration where we had the highest number of deportations, and that's where we had a lot of these efforts, like in Santa Ana, where they were a little more involved through the 287G bill, which allowed them to have a little more enforcement in terms of immigrant issues. But I feel like we've seen that kind of decline, and we feel a lot of it does come from kind of these not only limitations, but just clarifications of people's rights when they're in custody and local law enforcement.
Thank you. Well, then we can conclude, but I would like to tell you, you are welcome to come and speak to the panelists. I know the undersheriff has to be in Carpinteria in about 25 minutes, so he might, lots of luck. So he might be on his way, but please go and pick up the materials on the back table and come and address anyone that you would like. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in January.